Let's go to the astonishing developments in the Middle East. Israel has struck Syria nearly 500 times in the days since Bashar al-Assad fled the country to Russia. Israel's been destroying weapons stockpiles. Here's the latest from CNN.
In the dead of night, Syrian naval ships going up in flames. At daybreak, this is all that remains of the Syrian fleet at Latakia after Israel launched a wave of strikes intended to destroy the strategic arsenal of the newly deposed regime of Bashar al-Assad. Israeli missile ships fired the fatal blow at Latakia. Many more were carried out by Israeli jets. Altogether, nearly 500 strikes since the fall of Assad's regime.
Let's bring in Australia's longest-serving Foreign Minister, Alexander Downer, joining us live from London. And Alexander, the key point here about what Israel's doing, it's seen off Hezbollah, of course, in southern Lebanon, got rid of most of their weapons and most of their leadership. Now it's taking the opportunity to get rid of these munitions and equipment in Syria while there's something of a vacuum there. And surely this is pushing back the influence, the malevolent influence of Iran in the region.
Well, it's that, but importantly, there's real uncertainty about what's going to happen in Syria and what sort of regime is going to come to power. It may be good that Assad has gone, there's no doubt about that. But what these alternatives are going to be like, we don't really know yet. And if it really is true that Syria is going to end up by being governed by a hardcore Islamist regime or even an Islamist regime of less hardcore, Israel doesn't want to take any risks that they will then have control of the Syrian Defence Force and can threaten Israel again. So these are preemptive measures, they're cautionary measures. They're dramatic, there's no doubt about that. But they will help to secure Israel in Israelis. And I mean, after what the Israelis have been through, they just can't afford to take any risks. And that's entirely understandable.
Yeah, I think it's an entirely positive development because they do make the region a safer place. As you say, great uncertainty about what sort of a regime will be in place in Syria. But let's make sure that it's not armed with all sorts of offensive weapons. So we'll keep an eye on that. In the meantime, Australia has again voted controversially in the United Nations, joining the sort of anti-Israel crowd. And this motion is particularly supportive of UNRWA, the UN relief agency in Gaza. Here's what Australia's representative had to say.
We note UNRWA's measures to terminate the employment of UNRWA staff members following the 7 October atrocities carried out by Hamas, atrocities that should have been unequivocally condemned by this resolution. Any involvement or affiliation with terrorist organisations cannot be tolerated. Australia will continue to press the United Nations and UNRWA to safeguard the organisation's neutrality.
It's pretty optimistic stuff, isn't it, Alexander Downer, talking about preserving or safeguarding UNRWA's neutrality. It's been exposed as not being neutral. Some of its own people were involved in the October the 7th atrocities.
Well, years ago when I was the foreign minister, I went to Gaza and I met with the UNRWA people, and there's no doubt where UNRWA stands in terms of Israel. There is deep hostility at the very best within UNRWA to Israel. And more than that, the fact that some personnel from UNRWA were actually involved in the 7th of October massacre of the Israelis is unconscionable. I think an organisation like that with people who have supported terrorism, I mean, they sacked them, right? I mean, how big of them? But has supported terrorism, which whose teachers teach anti-Israeli and anti-Semitic rhetoric to children, I think that an organisation like that can't any longer stand. And what is interesting about UNRWA is, regardless of these resolutions and why these sort of resolutions pass, because, you know, they're much supported by Iran, China and Russia, who have increasingly got a grip on the direction of the United Nations. And the United Nations is becoming, including the Secretary General, who is a Portuguese former Prime Minister, is becoming increasingly anti-Western. But UNRWA can't stand. It has to be completely dismantled. And if there is going to be UN-based assistance, yeah.
Just briefly on that, sorry to interrupt, but we're nearly out of time. Mike Kelly, the former Labor Defence Material Minister, you'd know him well. He's got experience in Iraq and the Middle East. He said very boldly on this program last night that Labor supporting these UN votes has repercussions for anti-Semitism back home in Australia. Is he right?
He is right, because what the Labor government are doing is giving a tick to those people, and they're deliberately doing it, of course. They're doing this for domestic political reasons to shore up their seats, which have significant Muslim populations. They're giving a tick to campaigns against the Israelis, and that's, of course, very, very quickly interpreted, not necessarily by the government, but by a lot of the people they're trying to appease, as a tick for anti-Semitism. So it's stirring up feeling against not just Israel, but feeling against Jews. And we've seen the consequences of that.
Absolutely. Shocking stuff. Thanks for joining us again, Alexander, and thanks for joining us throughout the year. We really appreciate it. Wish you and Nikki and the family a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.